At exactly 6:19 in the evening, a voicemail notification from an unknown number popped up on my phone screen. I was in my Greenwich office at the time, matching signatures on the beneficiary page of a client's trust file. I have a 20-year habit of keeping an eye on every little detail. So when the voicemail started playing automatically, I didn't ignore it. It was a child's voice, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sounding incredibly excited. She was saying, "Daddy, are we going to celebrate my birthday at Uncle Joe's lake house again this time, just like last year?" My hands froze over the file, but my fingers didn't tremble. It's ironic, isn't it? A compliance officer who spent 20 years spotting truth and lies on paper could completely miss such a massive lie in her own life for months. Derek, my husband, had been going away every other weekend for the past 3 years under the guise of client retreats. And I, calm as always, understanding as always, just kept managing his schedule. If you also think that quiet people are the weakest, hold that thought. Like and subscribe to this channel, Story Haven Daily, because today I am going to tell you how silence can become the deadliest weapon. I learned that very lesson that night, sitting at my dining table. I didn't delete the voicemail. Instead, I forwarded it from my phone to my secure office email, complete with a timestamp, and saved it in a folder named Exhibit A. That is just how I operate. I convert emotions into data first, and think about everything else later. I ran the caller ID through a reverse lookup tool, the exact same software I use for beneficiary verification at my firm. The number traced back to a small town in Massachusetts called Greenfield. It hit me then that Derek had left for a client retreat there at least 22 times over the last 3 years. I pulled up his old expense report folder, the one I had personally organized for him during tax season. It was the same hotel chain for every trip, the exact same pattern every time: fuel receipts, toll receipts, and a children's museum ticket that was attached by mistake one time. I had never asked questions, because it didn't feel like my place to ask. It should have been on him to tell me. Around 9 o'clock that night, I started making a list in my notebook, logging every date, every location, and every dollar amount. I wasn't crying. I was simply auditing my own life. Doing this audit meant I had to go back 19 years. Derek and I got married in 2007 in a small Boston chapel, where his mother had the flowers changed at the very last minute, and I didn't utter a word. That was the beginning of my compromises. When Derek lost his first job in 2010, I paid 3 months of our mortgage out of my own savings, without ever telling him that I had reduced my retirement contributions to do so. When his father fell ill, I was the one who handled every hospital bill, every insurance claim, and every Medicare form, while Derek paced outside the room, claiming he just couldn't bear to look at it all. My sister Karen used to say, "Margaret, you are the shock absorber of this family." I would laugh it off because it sounded like a compliment. I didn't realize that a shock absorber is the one part nobody pays attention to until it completely breaks down. Every birthday, every anniversary, every minor slip-up, I handled it all myself, thinking that keeping the peace was my contribution. It dawned on me that night that for 19 years, I had been building only one thing: room for evidence, right in my own home. That space I had made for the evidence was now starting to fill up. The next morning, at exactly 7:30, I arrived at my office, the first one there, just like always. I sat at my desk and pulled out the file for our joint revocable trust, the very trust we had set up in 2012 for our house and retirement accounts. I remembered that back then, Derek was in such a rush to fill out the dual signature forms that he listed me as a secondary trustee, assuming it was just a mere formality. Years later, when our estate planner advised us to update the trust, Derek brushed it off, saying we would look at it later, that there was no time right now. That later never came. My fingers lingered over the pages of that old document, where my name was still recorded, legally and perfectly valid. In 20 years of compliance training, I have learned one golden rule. Power doesn't lie where the noise is. Power lies where the paper is. Let me ask you a question. If you have ever felt so taken for granted in a relationship that your very existence was practically forgotten, with that in mind, I took my next step very carefully. I called estate attorney Helen Walker, someone I had been professionally connected with for the last 8 years, having collaborated on numerous client files. I didn't reveal my actual situation. I simply said, "Helen, I have a hypothetical question. If a secondary trustee, who is still legally active, believes that the primary trustee has used trust assets for an activity contrary to the beneficiary's interests, what options do they have under Connecticut law?" Helen answered without a second thought, stating that under a specific section of the Connecticut Uniform Trust Code, the secondary trustee can file a formal notification to request a temporary freeze on the assets, provided the documentation is in order. I took notes exactly like I would in a client meeting, in neat handwriting with every step carefully numbered. After hanging up, I closed my notebook. I didn't gaze out the window, nor did I let out a heavy sigh. I just turned to the next page and started writing. Step 1. Get a certified copy of the original trust document. I started digging into the roots of Derek's double life. I used my firm's public records database, the very tool we use for client asset verification. I found a property in Greenfield, Massachusetts, a small townhouse registered under the name Maple Ridge Holdings, LLC. The registered agent for the LLC turned out to be Derek's old college roommate, Tom Haywood, the guy we exchanged Christmas cards with every year. The payment history in the mortgage records was crystal clear, an auto payment of $1,080 on the 15th of every month, coming from a checking account that was never disclosed to me in our joint tax filings. I also checked the property tax records, which showed an owner-occupied status, meaning someone lived there permanently. I dumped this entire paper trail into a spreadsheet, column by column, date, amount, source account, and destination. When I filled in the final cell, the grand total stared back at me, $317,000 over 9 years, all siphoned from our joint trust to fund a shadow life. I saved the spreadsheet and named the file Exhibit C. After saving it, I didn't rush anything over the next 3 weeks. I sat at the dinner table with Derek every evening, asking him about his day, exactly as I had done for 19 years. Nobody suspected a thing. That is the real advantage of my training. In compliance, we learn that the most devastating audits are the ones nobody sees coming. I worked with Helen Walker to prepare a formal notification of successor trustee document and attached a petition for temporary freeze to it, which is filed under Section 45A-499 of the Connecticut Uniform Trust Code. I needed just one thing, a valid notary signature. I dug through our firm's old notary records and found that the notary Derek himself had used to stamp a power of attorney document 3 years ago had a commission that expired last year. Yet, that document still showed up as valid in the bank records because no one had ever challenged it. That was the exact loophole I needed. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have moved forward just as quietly, or would you have stopped dead in your tracks? The next chapter is the moment Derek realizes for the first time that something is horribly wrong. Stay tuned to Story Haven Daily, because this is where the tables completely turn. It was a Tuesday, at exactly 11:04 a.m., when I sent the formal notification of successor trustee document via a firm courier to 3 different locations: our joint bank's trust department, the county registry office in Massachusetts, and the address of Tom Haywood, the registered agent for Maple Ridge Holdings, LLC. I didn't do anything dramatic. No phone calls, no texts. I just sat in my office that day, reviewing a client's retirement account like any other ordinary day. At 5:45 in the evening, my phone rang. There was a tremor in Derek's voice that I hadn't heard in 19 years. He said, "The bank called. They are saying one of my accounts is frozen. There must be some mistake. You know about this kind of stuff. Could you look into what happened?" I didn't let a single hint of emotion slip into my voice. I simply said, "Which account, Derek?" There was a few seconds of dead silence on the other end, the kind of silence that falls when someone realizes for the very first time that the door they thought they had locked years ago was actually never shut in the first place. I didn't tell him the truth that night. I just told Derek, "I will talk to the bank tomorrow morning and see. Maybe it is just a system glitch." I knew it was a lie, but it was the very method I had been trained in for 19 years. Stay calm, handle things, and don't ask questions. The only difference was that this time, my silence wasn't a shield. It was my master plan. The next morning, an email came from Helen Walker with a confirmation that the temporary freeze petition had been accepted in court, and all disbursements for Maple Ridge Holdings, LLC, were on hold until the next hearing. Additionally, the bank's trust department had temporarily suspended Derek's individual access because without a formal request from the secondary trustee, the primary trustee couldn't make any major withdrawals alone. It was the exact clause we had added back in 2012 as a safety measure, never imagining who it would eventually be used against. I printed the email, filed it away as Exhibit D, and finished my coffee, just like I did every single morning. I went to the office that day too, but when I came home that evening, Derek was standing right at the door, holding a printout, his face pale and sunken. He said, "Margaret, you did this, didn't you? Your name is on this document, secondary trustee." Taking off my coat, without even looking his way, I said, "Yes, that name was right where you put it yourself in 2012, out of your own free will." He said, "Do you have any idea what this means? The house in Greenfield, that account, everything is frozen. I am going to have to explain this." I looked him in the eye for the first time and said, "No, Derek, I was the one who had to explain. For 9 years, on every tax return, on every joint statement, while I crunched the numbers for you, having no idea where those numbers were actually going." He offered no excuses. He just stood there, looking exactly like a man who suddenly realizes that the woman he thought was the softest, the most accommodating, was actually the most ruthless auditor all along. People often ask me what it feels like in that final moment when the truth comes to light. In the next and final part, I will tell you exactly that. Stick around with Story Haven Daily, because the real verdict is yet to come. I gave Derek that answer the very same night, along with the date for the court hearing. There was no drama at the hearing. Helen Walker simply laid the documents out in front of the judge, the timeline, the bank statements, the property records, that expired notary seal, and a 9-year paper trail of the money. Derek's lawyer offered a settlement within the very first week because he had absolutely no ground left to fight on. Every single piece of paper was already validated in my name. I didn't ask for the house in Greenfield. I didn't need it. All I asked was that the assets drained from our joint trust be legally returned to that exact same trust, with interest. As he signed the settlement, Derek asked, "Were you never angry?" I told him, "Anger is an emotion, Derek. I don't deal in emotions. I deal in compliance." Today, 2 years later, I still sit in that same Greenwich office at 7:30 every morning, examining every file with that same exact scrutiny. People often ask where I kept 19 years' worth of rage, and my answer is always the same. I didn't keep it anywhere. I simply filed it away on the proper forms. Remember, Keeping the peace isn't actually peace. It is just rent, and one day, that rent comes due. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Story Haven Daily, and stay tuned for our next true story.